some thoughts and information about the parish's activities in what we now call outreach, but which in earlier years might have been termed mission activity. Our records from the Snively years, unfortunately, don't give us any information. I expect there was almost certainly some kind of program in some way reaching out beyond the parish, but vestry meeting minutes give no records, and we have no bulletins or other sources. The possibility of an institutional ministry under our short-term rector, Robert Kemp, was apparently considered in 1908, but he left and did not return, and so nothing ever came of this. One of the main programs of outreach that the church had in its early years stemmed from a 2-week camping program for the parish choir boys, which was started in 1909 as an idea to encourage boys to join the choir. 1909 and 1910, they rented sites in Wisconsin, and the boys would come and have camping activities. A woman came along and prepared the food, which, to judge from the bulletin records, they had very large, ample meals. And in 1909, at least, the Parish Magazine story says that the boys sang at one of the local churches when they were there. But selecting a campsite was a big nuisance, and by 1911 they decided they would buy land for a permanent campsite, and they purchased a site on Lake Chapin near Berrien Springs, Michigan. The choir boys came. By 1913, the parish has a Boy Scout troop, and they have come. And the parish Girl Scout troop, by 1917, becomes the first girls group to visit the camp. And they reach out for outreach to other groups in the community, though we don't know what they were. There was some difficulty because there'd been a fire at the camp, and so their work had to be, campers, in addition to their regular activities, had to apparently be doing some repair work. By 1920, you're getting a good number of groups outside the parish who are coming. There's a group of mothers and children who came, and one mother wrote a very nice letter saying that since we got back, we've been telling everybody what we would be doing if we were still there with you, and her 2 sons have been praying for them every day in their prayers. Campers paid a small fee according to their circumstances, and 2 boys had saved up for the camp and had the money that they had saved had to be used to buy a dog, but somebody gave them the money for the camp so they could have both the camp and the dog. Most important figure associated with the camp was a parishioner named Frederick Spaulding. And Spaulding was confirmed in the first class at St. Chrysostom's in 1893 and was a proofreader at the Daily News, but although he could have had a much higher position, would not take it because it would mean that he would not have been able to take time off in the summer to run the camp. There were a number of memorial gifts made to the camp. A gift of land was given by the Cox family, whose older son, Rensselaer, was killed in the 1920s in a riding accident as a teenager. And Bill Cox, his younger brother, attended Sunday school and later became a warden and a vestry member, and members of the Cox family are still active at St. Chrysostom's today. Boys from Lawrence Hall, the Episcopal Charities Agency, came one summer, and boys with physical disabilities who were referred by county hospital came, and they had a very, very large group of campers over the years from various organizations outside the parish. A young people's group that did drama at the church in the 1920s sometimes would drive over to the camp and put on a play in the summer. Camp went on through the Depression, but was suffering more and more financial problems. Spaulding's health was worsening, and he had to step down as camp director in 1937, and he died a couple of years later. And a former parishioner who had attended the camp and had been around in the 30s said he thought that by the late 30s, many of the vestry were not extremely supportive of the camp, and it closed after the 1941 season. I don't know if World War II had any impact, but the story that was given out was that the lake was polluted and that they couldn't do swimming, and what was the point of having a camp if you couldn't swim? And my parishioner friend said, well, that had always been the case, and they had just used it as a reason to cut off the camp. He had very good memories of the camp, and he said they placed a lot of emphasis on American Indian customs and lore, and they got members of Indian tribes to come to the camp each year and had an Indian Day where the campers dressed as Indians. The parish began a missionary committee in 1916, which was involved in a variety of activities. They gave a grant to the predecessor seminary to Seabury Western, and they worked to coordinate fund appeals to the congregation. And they discussed outreach programs for the new parish house, and were the ones who made the proposal for the community center. There was also, I think, a spin-off of this group was the Social Service Committee, and they worked with their families who didn't have enough income to support the children and tried to help the parents find better jobs. And apparently this was a good-sized committee. There were 17 members present, according to the minutes at one meeting. The community center started in fall of 1923 with after-school programs, games in the gym, shop for the boys, dramatics and sewing for the girls, cooking for both boys and girls, art, leathercraft, kindergarten for young children, drawing, tap dancing. The space that's now used by the day school included a library where kids could come and study and do their homework. And during the Depression, this was particularly needed. The enrollment jumped from 193 in 1931 to 433 in 1932. There were two paid directors in the late 20s and early 30s, a couple. He was also the football coach at Lane Tech. And by 1932, they could no longer pay them, but they stayed on for 1 year because he was getting some income from the Lane Tech job, and the parish offered them space in the parish house rent-free. After that, they left, and a woman from the congregation took it over on a volunteer basis, and she recruited parishioners to help out. And by the 1938, the financial situation had improved, and they could again have a paid director. This program carried on until 1958, when Bob Hall came as rector, and almost immediately discontinued this, hoping to start a program that would appeal to young people in the parish. This didn't work out because it turned out that the kids from the parish normally did not have time for that kind of after-school activity. When World War II broke out, Dudley Stark, as rector, and the vestry investigated the possibility of starting a servicemen's center, and this did open up in the fall of 1942. The church was open from 7 to 11 on Wednesday through Sunday nights, and it was called the Service Men's Center, and this was actually correct because there weren't any women military people being trained in the Chicago area. They attracted men from Navy Pier, Great Lakes, Fort Sheridan, and 2 Air Force training centers downtown. And they used the gym for basketball. They had a jukebox. They sometimes played badminton. They had dancing. They had card games, board games. There was a ping pong table in the basement. The Women's Guild would bake food for refreshments, and women from the congregation and others were encouraged to sign up for duty as hostesses. And if you didn't come from this parish, you had to have a letter from your pastor. The group on the Sunday nights, because they had a Sunday evening service, attracted young men who had been active in their own parishes, and they would come to the evening service, and there was a dinner afterwards, and they'd stay on, and then they'd take part in the activities at the center, and some of them became acolytes or sang in the choir. And as you might expect, there were, of course, romances that resulted from between the hostesses and the participants. But one that was rather interesting, one of the hostesses, it was not one of the servicemen that she married, but it was the sexton. They were married and they had an extremely happy marriage. For many years afterward, the church would hear from people who had participated. I remember in probably the early 1990s, when the church was open for the garden walk and I was taking people through, a man came up to me and he said, "Oh, I remember dancing to your jukebox here in World War II." The center survived for a year after the end of the war because there was still one or two training bases in the city, and so they kept it on until the following June, when they had a grand dinner and invited all present and former attendees. They often had special parties. These were the days of the comic strip Little Abner, where they had Sadie Hawkins Day, where you were supposed to propose to, the girls were supposed to propose. Well, they'd have a Sadie Hawkins Day dance, and then they'd have parties with themes for some of the U.S. allies. There was, for instance, a Chinese night, and they'd have Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's observances. In 1977, a man who had watched a TV program on World War II wrote to St. Chrysostom's about the center and said, "It was away from home for myself and many others. I will never forget what the people in the church did, and they will always occupy a warm spot in my heart. Please convey my love, gratitude, and appreciation." One form of community outreach that began under Bob Hall was that he allowed space in the parish to be used for AA and other 12-step groups. This didn't get much publicity at the time and was opposed by some members of the vestry, but it was put through anyhow, and I think a good thing. But a small fire in the church took place in 1966. The damage was confined pretty much to the Harding room, and the official vestry records did not said they didn't know the cause of the fire. It might have been electrical, but I was told that it almost certainly was that one of the AA people had not put out a cigarette, and that if they'd said this, the vestry would have voted not to allow AA to meet there again. In 1967, Bob Howell became rector of the church, and he was called and accepted in large part because of an outreach ministry that he had started in his former parish, the Fishley Ministry, in his parish in West Springfield, Massachusetts. This was based on a program that had been started in England at a church. And you had volunteers on duty who responded to calls from people in need. They might need a babysitter, they might need to be driven somewhere, they might be looking for blood donors, shopping for shut-ins, reading to the blind, etc. And you could commit to one day a month where you did whatever service you received calls for, or you could do specific services, like saying you were available for transportation or to sit with an elderly person who needed someone or to babysit. And they had you didn't call the person directly, but there was a number that you called and they would relay the calls on, and there were very few crank calls. This got quite a lot of publicity, and Bob was on a couple of daytime TV shows talking about it. And it took some time for him to get it started, but in March 1970, the service began in Chicago. And first calls reported were 1/3 for transportation to hospitals, doctors, etc., 1/3 needing referrals to other agencies, 1/6 from sheer loneliness, and the remaining 1/6 needing food, clothing, or shelter. There were stories from some of the people who had taken calls. One woman came to an elderly person who had asked for transportation to the doctor, but when the volunteer arrived, she said no, she didn't want to go, she had no family, and the woman said, "I am your family and here is your physician," and she took the woman to the doctor, which was said saved her life. And they gave emergency assistance to a man whose wife was in the hospital and dying and who had 3 young children, and Fish provided emergency assistance and arranged for permanent help. And there was a story in great detail of a volunteer who worked all day on a Saturday to get electric power restored to an apartment in the ghetto where a mother and 6 children were living. At the end of a day, she felt the sense of triumph, like, wow, you see, they just couldn't do this. Several other congregations in the city joined Fish, and they included Temple Sholem. And when they affiliated with the group, Bob changed the name to Starfish to honor the Star of David. This program kept going until fall of 1977, and it closed for 2 major reasons. There were too many requests for weekday transportation when fewer volunteers were available and they couldn't meet them. And because more people were working full-time, there were fewer volunteers available during the day. And Bob, looking back over it later, said that he could see that it was not feasible in such a large area as Chicago, but that it might very well work for smaller areas. The 60s, of course, were the time when you were starting to have all the demonstrations and protests against the Vietnam War. And these really started to get going at about the time that Bob Howell came in 1967. And the second year he was at St. Chrysostom's, 1968, was the year of the Democratic Convention and all the things that happened then. And he was on vacation, but he started hearing what was going on in Chicago, and he cut back his vacation and immediately flew back to Chicago. He was a strong supporter of the Vietnam War, and he had invited a military speaker to come to some program at St. Chrysostom's because he felt that the pro side was not sufficiently heard. It was something that I couldn't get to, and I don't know what was said there, but I say this because he got back to Chicago and he immediately allowed the church basement to be open to healthcare workers who were taking care of demonstrators who had been injured, even though these were people whose views he did not approve of. And this did not sit well with a number of members of the congregation. And a week or so later, he preached on it in a sermon whose text was, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And his point was that these were people in need, and whether you agreed with them or not, you were not, Christians were not asked to consider that, but they should serve those in need regardless. Not really too much formal outreach ministry for a while, though the fish lay ministry was going on. But by fall 1977, there are the beginnings of a new program, a tutoring program. First year they did it was for high school students with learning disabilities in conjunction with the Episcopal Charities Agency Youth Guidance. And the program was only for 77, 78, but there was a lot of interest in a tutoring program, and that fall they began a grade school student tutoring program for students from Cabrini Green. This kept on until well into the 90s, but by that time other groups were beginning to offer similar programs. For the last couple of years or so, we kept on with the program in conjunction with the LaSalle Street Church. The 20s Social Service Committee made reference to meeting with families where there wasn't enough money coming in and helping to people to find better jobs. And this had probably been completely forgotten, but by the 1980s, a similar program came up. In the early 80s, it happened that just by chance, several people in the congregation happened to be talking, and it turned out that there was a case of networking, and people who were looking for jobs found out that somebody they knew had a job available. And at least one case, this worked very well. There was a woman in the congregation had been transferred to Chicago by her company, and after 4 or 5 years, the company said, she could, they were closing the Chicago office, and she could transfer back to the main office, but they couldn't guarantee how long she'd have a job there, and she decided this was too risky to move back. And she was a good Republican and a strong supporter of Governor Jim Thompson. And she learned from somebody in the congregation that he needed an office manager for his Chicago office. And she went there, got the job, and was just in seventh heaven because she just loved doing it, and she was a great supporter of Thompson. And with other cases like this, first they called it St. Chrysostom's Helpline to make it more formal. And then by 1988, Bob Howell started a 3-month study program on AIDS, homelessness, and joblessness. And in the joblessness segment, as a result of this, the parish started the Employment Council, which continued until quite recently. And they met every Monday, and you had speakers and people who could give you advice on jobs, and there were networking opportunities. And this, I think, did a really good job and helped many people. In early 1983, a couple who was about to go to Chile as missionaries with the South African Missionary Society and Episcopal Group came to St. Chrysostom's, and their presentation caused quite a lot of interest, and a group in the parish began what became the annual brunch auction. First one they had at St. Chrysostom's, later they'd have them at the Racket Club. And you would get donations from members of the congregation, and you'd have silent auction items you could write bids for, and you would have a live auction. And this became a big social event among the congregation. People enjoyed this very much, and it was the John Fornengo, who's still a member of the parish, was the live auctioneer, and he was the best, and he'd get up here. Once I remember he got a husband and wife bidding against each other for some item, and they would really do very well. And I think perhaps the one that did, I don't have figures on it, but the one that I think really brought in the most money was 1989 for when the diocese was starting an AIDS program, and the money was to go for this. And I remember this because I had been going through things in closets and storage, and I found this set of 12 plates with scenes of the University of Chicago campus that my mother had bought. She was an alumna, and at the time she bought them, they weren't very expensive. And I thought, well, I took one summer school once at the USC, but that's my only contact, and I don't really see any reason for keeping these, and maybe someone would buy them. Well, I took them in, and a few days later someone said that they had been valued at $100 a plate. And it turned out there were two people at the auction with ties to the university, and the bidding was really quite good, and so I got a nice tax write-off, and the diocesan AIDS ministry did well. When Ray Webster came as rector in 1993, he continued the tutoring program for students at Cabrini Green, which we had been doing for a number of years. However, it turned out that other organizations were getting involved as well, and for a while we did a joint program with the LaSalle Street Church, but by mid-90s, it turned out that we were not really needed in this ministry, and we discontinued it. But just about at the same time, maybe even a little earlier, we started a new outreach ministry. A woman who came on the vestry about the time that Ray came had a high school-age son who had to do community service, and he had done work at Deborah's Place. And she got very interested and wondered if the parish could do something for the Deborah's Place Women's Shelter. And as it turned out, we could, and this began the Deborah's Place Cooking Project, which has been going on ever since. And a group meets at the church and prepares a dinner for one evening a month. It's now always the third Thursday of the month. Used to be we always met on Thursday, but it used to be that we'd do it for the next day, but we've shifted it now. And the person in charge of the program puts together a menu, and we all come over and do various parts of the preparation. Somebody is responsible for doing the shopping and bringing the food to the church, and then it's cooked and it gets taken over to Deborah's Place. They don't like to have visitors from outside cooking the meal there because the women worry that their exes that they're trying to lose contact with might get involved in a program like this and might get after them. So where the food is done off the premises and is taken over there. A few years later, probably the early to mid 2000s, Ray was saying that he believed that we should be doing something with more direct outreach, where we're actually meeting with the people. And the idea that he and Terry Stanford, our assistant at that time, came up with was to do a dinner once a month for people who were in need, and to do it as a very nice dinner with tablecloths on the table and all the fixings, not just something that is slapped together and handed out. And this has been going on ever since that time. We investigated and found out that the third Tuesday of the month was a time when there were no similar meals going on, and people in the neighborhood, streetwise vendors, people living at the Lawson House on Chicago Avenue and others are invited, and it has been very well received, and I think the people who participate in this enjoy this very much as well. We got into a totally new area of outreach ministry beginning about 2008 or 2009. The Websters had been in Mexico, and Judy and John Bross from the congregation had been there as well, and the two couples met, and they investigated and this led to involvement in the parish's first ministry outside the diocese to a foreign country. Bishop Purcell, when he was diocesan bishop, had set up a companion relationship with the Diocese of Southeast Mexico. The Websters and the Brosses met with Bishop Benito, who was the bishop of the Diocese of Southeast Mexico, and it ended up that we, group from the congregation, began making regular week-long visits there, where we support two parishes. I have been doing this now for 8 years, and it's a that's a rewarding and very enjoyable kind of ministry. We stay in the town of San Cristobal de las Casas, and one of the two churches we serve is in that city. The other one is about an hour and a half drive up into the mountains in Yochib. And we go to services at both congregations, and we planned some kind of an activity for the congregations. We had a very nice program last winter where everybody from Yochib was bussed into town for a service at San Cristobal. And then we had a Bible study with people translating into different languages because English speakers, Spanish speakers, and the local Mayan dialect, Saltal. And we had ordered lunch catered and had that. And then the men and the boys went to a nearby athletic field and played soccer, I think. And the women and the girls had a session in the church with the theme of recipes. And all the adults in the group got up and spoke in their various language about something that they liked to cook, and it was a very pleasant experience. And we have got to know the pastor of the two churches very well, and many of the lay leaders. We support the church at Yochib asked us to do this, that we pay for an instructor to teach English to the children on Saturdays, and we often try to get to that session, and the instructor will have the children show what they have learned, and they one year they tried to teach us a little of the Mayan dialect, and we didn't do as well on that as they did on English, but it has been a very good and rewarding program, which I hope will continue for some time to come.